Hi and welcome. This is Homebody Rundown and I'm HR. This is week 8 of Pantry Challenge. Link in the description to the YouTube channel that inspired me to do this. It's called Three Rivers Homestead. In this video, I am sharing some of the food I prepared over the last week. Right now at home, it's my husband and 2 younger kids, age 16 and 18. We do eat most of our meals at home. I gave myself a smallish budget for February so that I would focus on using up food we already had in the pantry, refrigerator, and freezers. In my mind, I was planning on Pantry Challenge for 8 weeks and didn't look at the calendar. There are 5 days left in February after I post this video, so I think I will do one more. Today, I'm going to make an egg casserole with spinach and sourdough bread. The bread has been in the freezer for 2 or 3 weeks. A couple other items from the freezer are roasted garlic and some diced feta. These roasted red peppers are from the pantry. I was inspired to make this after watching a video from Acre Homestead YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that in the description, but I'm not making any recipe from that video. This is just using up items that I already have available. And this is real life, just trying to get eggshells out of the eggs. First up, the last vegetarian sausage that we have. There isn't much here, but it'll still add a nice flavor to the casserole. Here are some of the seasonings that I'll add and dried chopped onion. I did run out of onions. You can see to the left here, I had some Parmesan cheese from last month. I should have put it in the freezer. I thought it was still good, but on closer inspection, it was not. I like to mix up the eggs with a meat serving fork. It just seems to work well. This sourdough bread must have gotten really dried out before it was put in the freezer. It was incredibly tough, and it wasn't very easy to get torn or cut into pieces. It's so dry. I'm going to soak it in some mushroom broth. That should make it easier to tear up the last big pieces and also add some flavor. The broth is from the pantry as well. I have a mediocre sense of taste, so I add roasted red peppers to a lot of foods because they have a strong flavor, and it's one that I really like. But they do add a little bit of sodium. I try to check the sodium on items I'm adding to dishes so I don't oversalt, because I can't always tell. In the end, if anything, I probably undersalt most of the food I make, but I think that's fine because people can just add some more salt if they need it. Adding milk and grated Parmesan cheese, but not too much of either one. I don't want this to be really heavy on the dairy. The bread is easier to tear now, but it absorbed all of that mushroom stock, so I'm going to add some more. Mixing in the roasted garlic. I make large batches of this and keep it in small jars in the freezer. Bought fresh spinach last week. I do prefer to rough chop this. I just don't like to get a super long piece of spinach in a bite. I coated this 9x13 baking dish with avocado oil spray, putting in a layer of spinach and then the sourdough bread pieces, doing a quick check for any really large pieces and cutting those with scissors. That ended up being the easiest option. Roasted red peppers. Decided to not add all of them. cut up more spinach and added another layer of that. Sprinkling on the sausage crumbles and then the diced feta cheese. This did sit out a while to defrost. Pouring over the egg mixture. Using this 8-cup measuring cup works really well for this purpose since it has a pour spout. Covering this with aluminum foil and will bake for about 30 minutes. After that bake time, I uncovered it and put it back in the oven for maybe another 10 or 15 minutes to get it crispy on top. While the casserole is baking, I'm going to do some food prep, starting with getting this pink salt into a jar. I do keep this on the counter. I buy it at Costco, and I like to use this salt to salt my pasta water. It's very affordable. This is a fine grain. I like to use these Ball brand wooden lids with a plastic rubber seal. They look really nice and they're pretty easy to take on and off. This is my last pack of goat cheese. I'm going to open up one section to use this week. The best by date on this one isn't until May. This brand does have a little tab on the corner to peel back the plastic, but it can be a little challenging to get started. I like to use these Pyrex rectangular glass dishes. They are just the right size for this amount of goat cheese. And I use a fork to break it up into more bite-sized pieces. Slicing up the peppers I got at Whole Foods last week. These are to snack on, and I will dice them up as needed for different recipes this week. The casserole is done. I did turn the broiler on for the last couple minutes. I almost always do this with casseroles just for the color and crispiness. This was in the oven for at least 40 or 45 minutes, but I am checking a few spots with a thermometer. Finishing slicing the peppers and now prepping some cucumbers. This is my favorite peeler. I will link it in the description below. These will also be for snacking on or adding to a salad. I don't mind leaving the skins on, but I prefer to peel off at least some of them. And then I'm just going to slice them up. I'm not going to prep the whole bag because they do not keep very long before they get gross. Here are the prepped items. I just find that we are more likely to eat foods that are ready to go. I wanted to show you how the casserole turned out. This was pretty perfect. I'm really glad I soaked the bread in broth because it wasn't dry at all and the flavors were excellent. For lunch today, I'm going to make a pasta sauce with garlic, white wine, and capers. These capers have been in the pantry for a while, and I have 2 jars, so it'll be good to start using these. The mushroom broth is also a pantry item, and the garlic is from the freezer. Melting a couple tablespoons of butter in an enameled cast iron pan and adding the garlic. Let that cook for a few minutes and adding white wine. Make sure to be careful if you're using wine or alcohol near open flames. Know what you're doing. I let this reduce for a few minutes. Now I'm adding the mushroom broth, the capers, and I decided this is probably too many capers after I saw how much sodium is in a tablespoon of these things. Now some black pepper and decided to use a little more butter. Also didn't show it but added lemon juice and let this cook a couple more minutes. This is spaghetti that I already had cooked in the refrigerator, so just need to let it absorb some sauce and warm through. It tastes pretty good, but it's so plain looking and just not very interesting to me. So using a couple ingredients I prepped earlier, the goat cheese and diced roasted red peppers. Making a couple type of muffins today, starting with blueberry muffins. Finished the box of paper liners, but I still have plenty. I had stocked up on these last year. I have a blueberry muffin recipe that I have been making for years. It's just a bit of a modified Betty Crocker recipe. I will link the original in the description. It's what I consider a real muffin. I'm not sure how to describe it, but a lot of muffins that I buy at the store seem more like a cupcake to me. Mixing in the blueberries by hand. If I do it in the mixer, the blueberries tend to get stuck inside the whisk. I almost exclusively make blueberry muffins because everybody in the house will eat them. And when we are not doing a pantry challenge, we always have blueberries in stock. The second type of muffin I'm making today is an experiment. These are poppy seeds and I have never baked with them. I was going to find a new recipe and make that, but thought I would just use my blueberry muffin recipe and replace the cinnamon and the blueberries with lemon juice and poppy seeds. Just a pantry note, I'm using the last of the flour I had when Pantry Challenge started at the beginning of January. I did pick up a 5-pound bag of white flour at Whole Foods last week. I prefer to buy 5-pound bags because it fits into this storage container I use. I got it at Walmart. I think this is too many poppy seeds. I mean, it looks like too many poppy seeds. Okay, the blueberry muffins are done, but they look weird. I mean, some look normal, but the ones that are this deep brown color on top, that's different than usual. I did use whole milk instead of 2% milk, so maybe that's part of it, but they are still soft on top, so I don't think it's a problem. Got the blueberry muffins out of the pans and will get the lemon poppy seed into the oven. I will reduce the bake time on these because they don't have frozen fruit. Yeah, I don't know. It looks like a lot of poppy seeds. So I am thinking you really need to use fresh lemon and lemon zest when you're baking. Only one kid in the house likes lemon flavor, baked goods, so I don't have much experience with it. Anyway, the poppy seed muffins are good and soft, and you can taste the poppy seeds, but I could not taste the lemon. So I'm making a lemon glaze, and while I'm at it, I'm also going to make a vanilla glaze for the blueberry muffins, which normally I just leave those plain. Gave it a taste and can really taste the lemon in the glaze. This is a separate bowl of milk and powdered sugar, and I mixed in some vanilla to this one for the blueberry muffins. I did not make much, maybe a couple tablespoons of each glaze. I didn't want a really thick layer of sugar on these, although if I had made more, I would just dip these into the glaze, which would be a lot quicker. Here's what the inside of the muffins look like. Maybe this isn't too many poppy seeds. I'm thinking it pretty much looks like what they have when I buy them at the store. Both muffins turned out texture-wise fantastic. Great taste, just not enough of that lemon flavor in the poppy seed muffins. I'm going to refill this canister of cocoa. Typically, I put the hot cocoa mix from Whole Foods in here. That is a milk chocolate type mix, but I'm getting tired of having this separate canister of Starbucks hot cocoa out. The kids are not a fan of the Starbucks, so I'm going to mix the two together, and this Whole Foods stuff really settles, by the way. I already put some of the Starbucks mix into this glass jar. I was able to get the new can of 365 cocoa mix and all the rest of the Starbucks cocoa into this glass jar. Got them mixed together, and both of the kids had cocoa tonight. We had a fire outside, and nobody said anything. I don't even think they noticed that the darker chocolate mix was in there. I'm going to make a bean soup for dinner with some white chili flavors, and a lot of the ingredients are from the pantry. The beans are some I cooked last month from dried beans we had on hand. I labeled them as navy beans, but I honestly don't know what kind of bean they were, just some sort of white bean. This is the only item not from the pantry. These are fresh orange and red bell peppers, mushroom broth that I've used for a couple things over the past few days. And these chilies were originally from a jar I opened from the pantry. I only needed part of them to make some black bean burgers a few weeks ago and had put the rest in the freezer. I did run out of onions, so I'm using dried chopped onions, some cumin, black pepper, garlic, and onion powder blend. For more flavor, I'm adding part of a jar of green salsa from Trader Joe's and more mushroom broth to cover the ingredients. Putting stuff away in the refrigerator, and I forgot, I had found a little jar of frozen black beans, which I defrosted, so I'm throwing those in as well, just to use them up. To go along with the soup, I am making cornbread. This is a Betty Crocker recipe. I will link it in the description. The only difference is that I add 2 eggs instead of 1. In the past, I used the whites from 2 eggs instead of 1 whole egg. And when I stopped doing that, I just started adding 2 eggs instead. I bake this in a cast iron frying pan. I melt some butter in the pan first and spread that around so that the batter doesn't stick. I forgot to pull this out a couple minutes earlier than what is printed on my recipe. Since we got a new oven last year, I've had to adjust bake times, but it wasn't burned or anything, just a little extra brown. I do make cornbread once or twice a month. It's something that everyone in the house will eat, which is very convenient since we are all fairly picky eaters. This tasted great. Soup is done, so turning off the crock pot and got out a few toppings. The pepper jack is from the freezer, and this green sriracha sauce has been in the pantry for a few months. I had never tried it before. The brand is Sky Valley, and it's really good. The soup was good too, and it was super easy to make. Going to make some iced tea using this loose leaf black tea that I've had for a long time. The electric kettle I'm using is an Amazon Basics product that I've had since 2018. I love using an electric kettle. It's really nice when we go on vacation, camping, or in a cabin with electricity, but no stove. I filled the jar the rest of the way with cool water after the tea had steeped, and I'm using this pour top mason jar lid. I'll link it in the description. Making whipped cream to use in a peanut butter pie. This is Horizon Organics Heavy Cream. I'm adding some fourfold vanilla and powdered sugar. I'm adding a little more sugar than I usually do since it is for a dessert. After this is mixed for a minute, I gave it a taste and it needed more vanilla. This fourfold stuff is stronger, so I start with a lot less. I made way more whipped cream than I needed. Need to make a crust for the peanut butter pie, so melting this butter. With Pantry Challenge, I realized I had way too many graham crackers, so that's what made me think about making a peanut butter pie. I am using the food processor to break down these crackers, but it is probably not ideal because it makes such a fine crumb, which may lead to a drier crust. I will link the recipe I'm looking at, but it does not say to use the food processor. I need 1.5 cups of graham cracker crumbs, but this is probably too many since it's ground so finely. The crust is crumbs, white sugar, and melted butter, and I am also going to use the food processor to mix these together, mostly with the pulse function. I did need to scrape down the sides a couple times. Instead of a pie plate, I'm using a Pyrex baking dish. This has to go in the refrigerator to set up, and it's just so much easier to use a dish with a lid. And none of my pie plates have a lid. Yeah, the crumb mixture is a little dry. I should have added more butter. I will link the recipe that I looked at for the filling, but I'm not really following it at all. To start with, I don't have enough cream cheese. We had already opened the last block, and I didn't want to use it all so that we could still have some for bagels. The mix is cream cheese, peanut butter, and powdered sugar. I tasted it and it was just lacking something, so I'm adding some Greek yogurt. If I had full fat, I would use that, but this is non-fat yogurt. I really like the addition of this. It added some tanginess. Need to add in the whipped cream. I'll let the machine mix some of it in and then I'll do the rest by hand. I could not figure out if I was supposed to use a baked crust or an unbaked crust, so I went ahead and followed the directions for a baked crust. It was fine. I scraped off some of the graham cracker crumbs to sprinkle on top of the filling when I'm done. Added in the peanut butter filling and then put a layer of whipped cream on top of that and into the fridge for a few hours. Put the last of these Trader Joe's graham cracker squares and one package of this Amazon brand graham crackers into a jar to keep out for snacks. Dinner tonight, I'm going to roast some frozen root vegetables that have been in the freezer way too long and some fresh Brussels sprouts. We'll make a rice and bean dish with these two pantry items. The Brussels sprouts package did say to wash them. Here are the seasonings that I will use on the roasted vegetables. Cutting the ends off of the Brussels sprouts, taking off any discolored outer leaves, and then cutting them in half and putting them on a baking sheet with parchment paper. Adding a fairly generous amount of olive oil and spraying them with avocado oil, adding mushroom umami seasoning, garlic powder, and salt. Making sure to mix everything thoroughly and get the sprouts coated, and then moving them into a single layer for roasting. I highly recommend the Jovial kidney beans. They always taste fantastic and they are not mushy. However, I did not like this packaged rice. It seems dry to me. This is not how you are supposed to prepare it, so there's that. Adding seasonings, and to help with that dryness, I'm adding in mushroom broth. Also some cilantro that I had washed and chopped and put in the freezer. I think the mushroom broth helped a lot. This ended up tasting pretty good and it was so incredibly easy. The peanut butter pie ended up tasting pretty good. However, my husband said he prefers it to be thicker. I think I added too much whipped cream, and if I had all the cream cheese, that would have made a difference. Oldest child will be home for spring break in a couple weeks, so I'm going to make this again, but omit the whipped cream. I will still use the Greek yogurt, and I'll see how that turns out. Here's dinner. The roasted vegetables were fantastic. I do have a convection roasting feature on my oven, which I used. It really gives the Brussels sprouts some crispy edges. The beans and rice were also good, but I did add some of that green sriracha sauce I just opened. It is so excellent. Tonight for dinner, I'm going to make salmon cakes or salmon patties. I have made these in a previous video, so I won't spend too much time on it. Using 2 cans of Deming's pink salmon, I buy this at Walmart. To go along with it, I'm making a mushroom risotto, and this is utilizing several pantry items and a bag of frozen sliced mushrooms. I have never made a mushroom version of this risotto, so I got ahead of myself. I needed to saute the mushrooms first before adding the rice, so I had to dump the rice out and cook the mushrooms with some olive oil. Then I added the rice and butter back in. I'm using the saute function on the Instant Pot. Almost every ingredient in this risotto is an item I've had since before January. Adding in the white wine, let that cook for a few minutes. Then the mushroom stock, and we'll pressure cook it. This is a recipe I got from a book, which I will link in the description if I can find it. I don't have a recipe for the salmon cakes, but I always include the same flavors like dill and lemon juice. To bind it together, I use an egg and some breadcrumbs. And after I stir everything in, if it still seems too wet, I will add more breadcrumbs. I think the things we made for dinner tonight may be the strongest smelling things I could possibly have made. Youngest child was really not a fan of those mushrooms cooking, but I am going to cook the salmon cakes outside on the grill, so I'm using this cast iron Lodge brand griddle. I added olive oil so that the patties don't stick. The most important thing I have found is to get these the same thickness so that they will cook in about the same amount of time. Kind of like cookies. Making a sauce for the salmon, utilizing most of the same flavors. This is sour cream and mayonnaise, adding black pepper, garlic, and onion powder mix, and salt, a little lemon juice, and dried dill. Had just a few jarred roasted red peppers in the refrigerator, so I diced those up and added them in. Gave it a taste, and it seemed like it needed more lemon juice. I think these days I tend to make things with stronger flavors. I lost a decent amount of my sense of taste after I had COVID, so I really rely on my husband and kids to taste stuff and let me know how I did, or I'm just working off memory. Things I know will taste good. The risotto is done, so letting that vent and starting the spinach. I'm going to cook the rest of this enormous container, which barely fits in this pan. Put some olive oil and butter in here and a little salt. The recipe says to check the rice and add liquid and saute it a little longer if it's not quite done, but I've always had really good luck with the rice being perfect. Tasted it and it was good, so I'm going to add in some grated Parmesan cheese. I forgot to do this in the house, so I came out to the grill to add salt and seasonings to the top side of these salmon cakes. After I flip them, I turn the heat down, but before I take them off the grill, I do check the temperature to make sure they've cooked through. The spinach has cooked down to about 2 servings. I'll leave the lid off and let some of the moisture evaporate. This was a very fragrant dinner, but it was worth it, and I used up a lot of pantry items. This morning, I'm going to make oatmeal raisin cookies. Almost all of the ingredients are from the pantry. I do add chocolate chips, so I was happy to find these white Ghirardelli chocolate chips. I thought I was out, but they had just fallen behind some stuff. Whenever I'm making something that requires getting out a lot of items, I like to prep ahead of time if I can, like get stuff out the night before, or for this, I got out the ingredients and got the sugar and the shortening into the mixing bowl when I was making my oatmeal for breakfast. I also got out the butter earlier so that it would soften, although it's only been about an hour, so it's not super soft. I know a lot of recipes say to mix dry ingredients separately, and I'm sure that does make a difference, but I do not take the time or make the dishes. Typically, I add in the flour and then I will add the other dry ingredients like baking powder or baking soda and salt on top of the flour and mix it together at the same time. I'm not sure if that actually helps disperse the ingredients better, but I keep doing it. There's plenty of sugar and fat in this recipe, but at least it has 3 cups of oatmeal, and I gotta think that's worth something. I'm about to do something that you probably should not do in your KitchenAid mixer, and that is adding in a bunch of chocolate chips and raisins. Stuff like this is probably a contributing factor to why I've had to have this thing serviced. I think they had to replace the motor. I don't know, it was very expensive. So do your research and don't destroy your mixer. I have been thinking about getting a Bosch mixer. I was happy to see that they had a stainless steel bowl. I run everything through the dishwasher possible, so I would prefer that over plastic. However, if I read this correctly on the website, it said that the stainless steel mixing attachment cannot be used with a stainless steel bowl, and I want to put everything in the dishwasher, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get it. I don't know why the cookies on the right are larger. I'm guessing it's just from its placement in the oven. I do bake all 3 cookie sheets at one time. I'm leaving a plate out for the family to see and put the rest into these half-gallon jars. This is the salt dispenser I keep by the stove. I needed to refill it, but I went ahead and washed it because it does get splattered with stuff. I do have this labeled as salt because I have the exact same dispenser for sugar, but I keep that in a different place in the kitchen, and so far I have never used the wrong one. I'm going to make 1 pot garlic Parmesan pasta that I've made before. The recipe is from damndelicious.net, and I will link it in the description. I'm using some roasted garlic that I had in the freezer instead of fresh garlic, and mushroom broth instead of chicken broth. I didn't have enough mushroom broth. I emptied that box and it was my last one, so I am adding water and half of this not chicken bouillon cube. Also added in 1 cup of milk. I thought it would be nice to break the pasta into bite-sized pieces, but please don't do this. It was a mistake. These pasta are really sharp. You could easily cut yourself. I just wish I had a slightly wider pan so the whole fettuccine noodle would fit in better. For a vegetable, I am reheating the Brussels sprouts that I roasted, adding a very tiny amount of olive oil and some black pepper and roasted red pepper. I forgot I was supposed to simmer this uncovered and I put a lid on it, so I turned the heat up to boil off some of the liquid and didn't pay enough attention. It got a little brown on the bottom, but it still tasted great. I'm glad I already did my grocery shopping and didn't have to go to the store a single time this week. I think the biggest hits of the week were the egg and sourdough bread casserole, the peanut butter pie, and the risotto. Like I said at the beginning, I am going to do 1 more pantry challenge video for a partial week and then kind of a wrap up of my thoughts on the whole pantry challenge thing. Thanks for watching.